What happens when the foundation of a perfect life is a perfect lie? For Isabella Sterling, wife of billionaire titan Alexander Sterling, her world was a fairy tale written in gold and diamonds. Pregnant with the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire, she had everything a woman could desire. But on the very night she felt her baby's first kick, a single phone call shattered her reality. The other woman, the mistress she never knew existed, was in labor. The firstborn Sterling child was coming. But in a twist that would send shockwaves through New York's elite, Alexander made a choice so swift, so ruthless, it defied all expectation. This isn't a story about a man choosing between two women. It's the story of a war fought in secret, where a baby is a weapon. And the truth is the most devastating secret of all. The air in the Park Avenue penthouse was always the same, a sterile, climate-controlled 72 degrees. Scented with a faint, custom blend of white tea and peony. It was the smell of wealth, of insulation from the gritty, unpredictable world below. From her vantage point on the 68th floor, Isabella Sterling could see the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation. A universe away from the turmoil brewing in her heart. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her stomach. A protective, almost unconscious gesture she'd adopted over the past 7 months. Inside, her daughter was sleeping. She imagined the tiny heart beating in rhythm with her own. A steady, innocent drumbeat in the cathedral-like silence of their home. This child was supposed to be the final, perfect seal on their perfect life. Alexander Sterling wasn't just a husband. He was an institution. A man whose face graced the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal with unnerving regularity. He'd inherited a formidable real estate empire and, through sheer predatory genius, tripled its value before he was 40. He moved through the world with a gravitational pull. All quiet confidence, bespoke Brioni suits, and the ever-present weight of his Patek Philippe watch. Its subtle tick-tock seeming to count down the millions he made by the minute. To the world. And to Isabella. He was magnificent, attentive, generous, and fiercely protective. He'd courted her with the same strategic precision he used for a corporate takeover. Sweeping the art curator from the quiet halls of the Met into a life of whirlwind galas, private jets to St. Bart's, and the effortless acquisition of anything her heart desired. She loved him. Not for the money, but for the moments of perceived vulnerability she saw in his steel-gray eyes when he thought no one was watching. She loved the myth she had built of the man. But myths were fragile things. The distance had been subtle at first. A few more late nights at the office. His explanations vague but plausible, a volatile market in Hong Kong. A sensitive negotiation with a German conglomerate. Then came the hushed phone calls he took on the terrace. His back to her. His voice a low, indecipherable murmur against the wind. The scent of a different perfume, not the Chanel No. 5 of his executive assistant. But something floral. Younger. And illicit, clinging faintly to his collar one evening. She dismissed it all as the paranoia of a hormonal pregnant woman. She was carrying the Sterling heir. She was his wife. The woman he'd chosen. The one whose hand he held at the opera. Whose taste he praised in front of ambassadors. She was Isabella Rossi Sterling. She was unshakable. Tonight. The lie she had so carefully told herself crumbled to dust. They'd just returned from a charity dinner at the Frick Collection. Alexander had been the perfect husband, one hand on the small of her back. the other holding a glass of sparkling water for her. His smile as polished as the marble floors. But his eyes were elsewhere. He checked his phone constantly. A nervous energy thrumming just beneath his calm facade. Now, back in the sterile perfection of their home, the tension was a living entity in the room. He loosened his tie. His movements stiff. "Everything all right, darling?" Isabella asked. Her voice softer than she intended. "You seemed preoccupied tonight." He turned. And for a second, she saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes, panic. Or perhaps regret. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. Replaced by his usual mask of control. Just a complex deal. Izzy. A lot of moving parts. Nothing for you to worry about. He walked to the bar. Pouring himself a Macallan 25. The amber liquid catching the light. He never drank whiskey on a weeknight. And then it happened. His phone. A sleek black slab left carelessly on the granite countertop. Buzzed. Not a text. But a call. The screen lit up with a name that seared itself into Isabella's mind, Chloe Duval. It wasn't a business name. It wasn't a name she recognized from their social circle. It was a woman's name. Simple and devastatingly unfamiliar. Alexander lunged for the phone as if it were a venomous snake. His movements unnaturally fast. He snatched it up. His thumb hovering over the decline button. But he was too late. Isabella had seen his name. And the picture accompanying it, a young woman with vibrant blonde hair. A spray of freckles across her nose. And eyes that sparkled with a carefree confidence that Isabella hadn't felt in years. "Who is Chloe Duval?" Isabella's voice was a whisper. But it sliced through the silence of the penthouse like a razor. Alexander froze. His back to her. The muscles in his shoulders bunched. "It's no one." "A wrong number." "A wrong number you seem desperate to silence." She pressed. A cold dread creeping up her spine. Chilling her to the bone. She took a step closer. "Alexander. Look at me." "Who is she?" He wouldn't turn. He just stared at the phone in his hand as if it held the codes to a nuclear launch. It buzzed again. Insistently. A text message this time. From Chloe Duval. "Alex. My water broke. I'm on my way to Lenox Hill. It's happening now." The message preview flashed on the screen for a mere second. But for Isabella, time seemed to stretch and distort. Each word was a physical blow. My water broke. Lenox Hill. It's happening now. The room began to tilt. The white tea and peony scent was suddenly cloying. Suffocating. She gripped the back of a plush armchair to steady herself. The velvet feeling rough against her trembling fingers. Her water broke. The words came out choked. Incredulous. She's having a baby. Finally. Alexander turned. The mask was gone. In its place was a face she'd never seen before. A landscape of guilt. Panic. And a chilling, calculated resolve. He didn't deny it. The time for lies was over. And the sheer bluntness of the truth was more brutal than any deception. Yes. He said. His voice flat. Devoid of emotion. The single word hung in the air. A death knell for the world Isabella had known. The floor seemed to drop away from beneath her feet. The baby inside her gave a sudden, sharp kick, as if sensing its mother's distress. The sensation, which usually brought her such joy, now felt like a shared pang of betrayal. Our baby, Isabella stammered, her hand flying to her own stomach. I'm having your baby. She's. Who is she? How long? It's complicated. Isabella. Complicated? She shrieked. The sound raw and ugly in the pristine room. Complicated is a bad business deal. Alexander. Complicated is choosing a caterer. This is a nightmare. His phone rang again. This time, he answered it, his voice dropping into a low, commanding tone. I'm on my way. Yes. The private suite is booked under the name Finch. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was going to her. He was leaving his 7 months pregnant wife to go to the birth of his mistress's child. The realization was so monstrous, so utterly unbelievable, that for a moment, Isabella could only stare at him, her mind a white-hot blank. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He walked towards the bedroom, his steps measured and sure. Where are you going? She asked, though she already knew the answer. He paused at the threshold, his silhouette framed by the soft light within. I have to go. You have to go. Her voice cracked with a hysterical laugh that was half sob. You have a choice, Alexander. You can stay here with your wife, with your child, or you can walk out that door. But if you walk out that door right now, you are making it clear who and what you value. He finally looked at her, and his expression was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. It was not the look of a man torn between love and lust. It was the look of a strategist assessing a threat, of a CEO managing a crisis. It was cold. It was impersonal. I'll be back, he said simply, as if he were just stepping out to buy a newspaper. He disappeared into the master suite. Isabella stood frozen, listening to the sounds of him opening a drawer, the jingle of keys, the soft click of his watch being fastened back onto his wrist. He was choosing. He had chosen. He re-emerged moments later, holding a sleek leather briefcase she'd never seen before. He walked past her towards the grand foyer with its marble floors and imposing mahogany door. He didn't look at her. He didn't say another word. Isabella followed him, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. Alexander. Please. She begged, the last shred of her pride dissolving. Don't do this. Don't do this to us. To our daughter. He stopped with his hand on the door handle. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp and unforgiving in the dim light. This is bigger than you understand, Isabella, he said, his voice low and final. Lock the door behind me. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut with an air of finality that echoed in the cavernous apartment. The sound bounced off the polished surfaces, off the priceless art and the crystal vases, and settled deep in Isabella's bones. She was alone. Utterly and completely alone in their gilded cage. 68 floors above a city that had never felt more hostile. Her perfect life. Her perfect husband. Her perfect future, all of it had been a lie. And as she slid down the wall, Her body racked with sobs that tore from the very depths of her soul. She understood one horrifying truth: another woman was giving birth to the first sterling heir. And her husband, the man she loved, had gone to be by her side. The war had begun, and she had just become its first casualty. The private birthing suite at Lenox Hill Hospital was a world away from the clinical chaos of the main maternity ward. It was decorated in muted tones of cream and sage green, with plush armchairs and a flat-screen television displaying a serene image of a waterfall. It smelled of lavender and antiseptic. To Chloe Duvall, it was the finish line. Sweat beaded on her forehead, mingling with tears of pain and exhilaration. Every contraction was a wave of fire. But she rode each one with a grim sense of triumph. This pain was productive. This pain was purpose. For 9 months, she had been Alexander Sterling's secret. A carefully guarded liability. Tonight, she was giving him something his perfect porcelain wife could not yet give him: a son. His firstborn. She had met Alexander at an art auction. A world she'd navigated with a hustler's ambition. She wasn't a blue-blooded heiress like Isabella. She was a self-made gallery assistant with a sharp eye and an even sharper understanding of what powerful men wanted. She hadn't just offered him her body. She'd offered him an escape. With her, he wasn't the titan of industry. He was just Alex. They'd talked about art. About philosophy. About dreams he'd had before the empire consumed him. He'd made her believe she was the only one who saw the real him. When she'd told him she was pregnant, a calculated risk after a forgotten birth control pill, she saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something else, a possessive, almost primal pride. He'd set her up in a luxury apartment in the West Village, paid her expenses, and visited her in stolen hours, cloaked in darkness. He'd promised her in hushed tones that he would handle the situation with Isabella. Chloe interpreted that as she saw fit, that he would leave his wife for the mother of his son. Now, as the final, agonizing push began, she clung to that belief. The doctor, a renowned obstetrician named Alastair Finch, whose exorbitant fees Alexander had paid without blinking, offered calm encouragement. One more. Chloe. The head is crowning. One more big push. With a final, guttural cry, her son entered the world. The room was filled with his lusty, indignant wail. The nurse cleaned him quickly and laid him on Chloe's chest. He was perfect. A shock of dark hair just like Alexander's and tiny, clenched fists. She looked at his face, searching for a sign. A confirmation of her victory. She would name him Leo. A lion. The king of the jungle. Leo Sterling. She whispered. Tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. It was in this moment of pure, unadulterated triumph that Alexander Sterling walked in. He didn't look like a man rushing to the side of his newborn son. He looked like a man arriving at a hostile board meeting. He wore the same immaculate suit from the gala. His tie perfectly knotted. He carried the black leather briefcase. His face was an unreadable mask of granite. He stopped several feet from the bed, his gray eyes sweeping the scene with a cold, analytical gaze. He looked at the baby on her chest, then at Chloe, and then at Dr. Finch. Is the child healthy? He asked, his voice cutting through the warm, emotional atmosphere like a shard of ice. Dr. Finch, taken aback by the man's detached demeanor, nodded. Perfectly. Mr. Sterling. 8 pounds. 2 ounces. Apgar scores of 9 and 9. Alexander gave a curt nod. He did not step closer. He did not ask to hold his son. Chloe's heart, which had been soaring, began to plummet. This was not the reunion she had imagined. Where was the tender kiss? The emotional tears? The whispered promises of their new life together? Alex, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Come meet him. Come meet our son. Alexander's eyes finally settled on hers. The warmth she had cherished during their secret nights together was gone. In its place was a chillingly polite distance. We need to talk. Chloe, he said, gesturing for the nurse and doctor to give them privacy. Dar. Finch, looking uncomfortable, quickly ushered the nurse out, closing the door softly behind them. Alexander walked over to one of the plush armchairs, placing the briefcase on the small table beside it. He opened it with a series of precise clicks. It did not contain baby clothes or a celebratory bottle of champagne. It contained documents. Stacks of them. Bound in crisp legal blue. What is this? Chloe asked, clutching Leo tighter. A primitive fear began to replace her euphoria. This, Alexander said, his voice level and devoid of all emotion, is the conclusion of our arrangement. He slid a sheath of papers across the table. This is a settlement agreement. It's quite generous. It provides you with ownership of the West Village apartment. Free and clear. It establishes a trust fund for the child, in the amount of $25 million, to be managed by my family office. It will cover all his living and educational expenses through to his postgraduate studies. You will also receive a personal annuity of $500,000 a year. For life. Chloe stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. A settlement. An arrangement. He spoke as if he were closing a real estate deal, not discussing the birth of their child. I don't understand. She whispered. What about you? What about us? Alexander leaned back in the chair, steepling his fingers. It was a pose of absolute power and control. There is no us. Chloe. There never was. You were a diversion. A pleasant one for a time. But a diversion nonetheless. The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. Every intimate moment. Every shared secret. Every whispered promise, all of it had been a lie. A transaction. But the baby. She stammered, looking down at the innocent child in her arms. Our son. He's your firstborn. The first Sterling of his generation. He is a child who will be exceptionally well provided for. Alexander corrected her, his tone sharpening slightly. But he will not be a Sterling in name. That is one of the conditions. He will bear your surname. He will not be my heir. He will have no claim on the Sterling Corporation or my personal estate. My heir will be the child my wife is carrying. My legal, legitimate child. The emphasis he placed on the word wife was like a slap in the face. Isabella. The pale, elegant woman he was supposed to be leaving. You're choosing her? Chloe asked, her voice rising with disbelief and fury. You're choosing your pregnant wife and her baby over me. Over your son. I gave birth first. He's here. He's real. This was never a choice between you and Isabella. Alexander said. Standing up. The air of civility dropping. Replaced by an aura of pure, intimidating authority. You fundamentally misunderstand your position. My life. My legacy. My empire, it is all tied to my family. And my family is with my wife. You were a complication I have now contained. He pushed another document towards her. This is a non-disclosure agreement. It is ironclad. You will never contact me, my wife, or any member of my family or business again. You will never speak of our association. If you violate it in any way, all financial support will cease immediately. And I will use the full force of my legal power to take custody of the child. Citing your instability and breach of contract. He was not just leaving her. He was erasing her. He was buying her silence. Walling her and his son off in a gilded prison while he returned to his real life. The baby in her arms wasn't a trump card. He was a liability to be managed. Tears of rage and heartbreak streamed down Chloe's face. You bastard. She hissed. You used me. Yes. He said without a hint of remorse. And you attempted to use me. You thought a baby would secure you a position in my life. It was a bold move. But a miscalculation. You aimed for the throne and ended up with a payoff. It's more than most people get. He glanced at his Patek Philippe. My lawyers will be in contact with yours to finalize the paperwork. A car will be waiting for you upon your discharge. He turned to leave. Having never once touched his son. Alexander. Wait. Chloe cried out. A last desperate plea. Just look at him. Please. He has your eyes. Alexander paused at the door. His back to her. For a long, agonizing moment. He stood perfectly still. Chloe held her breath. Hoping for a crack in his armor. A flicker of fatherly love. When he finally spoke. His voice was quiet. But it held the finality of a death sentence. My wife is waiting for me. He said. That is where my focus lies. That is where my future is. I suggest you focus on yours. He opened the door and walked out. Leaving Chloe Duvall alone in the lavender-scented suite with her multi-million-dollar settlement and a baby who had a father but would never have a dad. The triumphant cries of her newborn son now sounded like a mournful wail. She had gambled everything and lost in the most spectacular way imaginable. She hadn't won a king. She had been paid off like a commoner. While Alexander Sterling, without a moment's hesitation, returned to protect his queen and the true heir to his throne. The click of the penthouse door opening was a sound that made Isabella's heart leap into her throat. She had spent the last 3 hours in a state of suspended agony. Curled on a sofa in the cavernous living room. A cashmere throw clutched around her like a shield. She hadn't cried since her initial, gut-wrenching breakdown. A cold, brittle anger had taken its place. Alexander stepped inside. Looking just as immaculate as when he had left. There was no sign of the emotional turmoil of childbirth on his Facino joy. No exhaustion. He looked like a man who had successfully concluded a difficult transaction. He placed the black leather briefcase on the floor and loosened his tie. His eyes finally meeting hers across the vast expanse of the room. Isabella. He began. His voice quiet. Don't. She cut him off. Her own voice sharp and steady. Don't you dare come in here and say my name as if you haven't just shattered our entire life. Is she okay? Is your child okay? She spat the word child as if it were poison. Alexander walked further into the room, stopping a respectful distance away. The mother and child are healthy. Good. Isabella said with a chilling lack of emotion. Then you have your heir. Your firstborn. Congratulations. Alexander. I assume my services are no longer required. That's not what this is, he said, taking another step closer. Izzy. Please. Let me explain. Explain what? She shot back, rising to her feet, her pregnant belly a prominent symbol of his betrayal. Explain how you looked me in the eye and lied to me for months. Explain how you left your pregnant wife to be at the birth of your mistress's baby. There are no words in the English language that can explain that. Alexander. There is only the fact of it. I came back, he said, his voice laced with an earnestness that almost sounded real. I was there for less than an hour. I handled it. And I came back home. To you. Doesn't that tell you anything? It tells me you have an excellent sense of damage control. She retorted. What did you do? Pay her off. Threaten her. Set her and your bastard child up in a secret love nest somewhere. I have ended the arrangement, he said, his jaw tight. I have made it unequivocally clear that my life is here with you. With our daughter. What happened with Chloe was a mistake. A grave error in judgment. But it's over. He tried to reach for her hand. But she snatched it away as if his touch would burn her. Over. She laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. A child was just born. Alexander. A child that shares your blood. It is never going to be over. It will be a shadow that hangs over us. Over our daughter. For the rest of our lives. I chose you. He insisted. His gray eyes boring into hers. When it came down to it, there was no hesitation. I chose this family. I chose our future. I am begging you, Isabella, to let us find a way to move past this. For the first time since he'd walked in, she saw a crack in his composure. A desperation. He looked at her stomach. At the child they had created together. And his expression softened into something that resembled genuine remorse. It was this flicker of the man she thought she knew. The man she loved. That sowed a tiny, treacherous seed of doubt in her heart. Was it possible? Could a man make such a catastrophic mistake and still, ultimately, choose the right path? Her mind screamed. No. But her heart, foolish and broken, whispered. Maybe. She was pregnant. Emotional. And terrifyingly alone. The thought of navigating this world without him. Of raising a child amidst the scandal of a public divorce. Was a chasm of fear. I need time. She whispered. Her anger deflating into exhaustion. I don't know what I need. But I can't look at you right now. She turned and walked towards their bedroom. A sanctuary that now felt tainted. She closed the door behind her, leaving him standing alone in the monument to their broken marriage. For the next 2 weeks, they lived as ghosts in the penthouse. They slept in separate rooms. They spoke only when necessary. Their conversations stilted and formal. Alexander was a model of contrition. He cancelled all his evening meetings. He brought her breakfast in bed, which she barely touched. He sat with her in silence for hours, as if his mere presence could atone for his sins. Isabella, meanwhile, felt like she was drowning. The betrayal was a constant physical ache in her chest. She wanted to believe his words, to accept his choice to return to her as proof of his love. But a nagging, insidious thought kept her from succumbing. Alexander Sterling did nothing without a reason. His actions were always calculated, his motives layered. Why had his choice been so swift, so ruthless? It felt less like a man following his heart and more like a king sacrificing a pawn to save his queen. But why was the pawn his own son so easily disposable? The doubt festered. It was this doubt that led her to make a call she never thought she would have to. She called Marco Diaz, a man who worked in the shadowy world of private investigation. He was discreet, expensive, and ruthlessly effective. A name she'd overheard at a cocktail party once. Filed away for a rainy day she never thought would come. The storm had arrived. I want to know everything about a woman named Chloe Duval, Isabella told him, her voice low and steady over the encrypted line. Her history, her associates, her financials. Everything. Especially over the last year. Marco, a professional to his core, asked no personal questions. It will be done, Mrs. Sterling. A week later, an encrypted file arrived in her private email. Isabella opened it in the dead of night while Alexander slept in the guest room down the hall. Her hands trembled as she clicked through the contents. The file was thorough. It detailed Chloe's modest upbringing, her ambition, her swift climb through the lower rungs of the New York art scene. It showed the sudden, massive influx of cash into her accounts 9 months ago. It had photos of her entering and leaving the West Village apartment and clandestine shots of Alexander visiting late at night. It was all there. A sordid, painful confirmation of the affair. But then, Isabella saw something that made the blood drain from her face. It was in a subfolder titled Known Associates and Communications. Marco's team had hacked Chloe's phone records and social media. Most of it was mundane. But one recurring contact stood out, a series of calls and encrypted messages to and from a number registered to a shell corporation. A shell corporation that Marco, with his considerable resources, had traced back to one man, Marcus Thorne. The name hit Isabella like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne was not just a business rival to Alexander. He was a nemesis. Years ago, Thorne and Sterling had been locked in a brutal battle for a massive downtown development project. Alexander had won. Not just by outbidding Thorne, but by exposing a bribery scandal that had nearly landed Thorne in prison and left his company in ruins. Thorne had lost everything, his fortune, his reputation, his marriage. He had vanished from the New York scene. A ghost rumored to be nursing a vendetta of epic proportions. Why in God's name was Chloe Duval, Alexander's mistress, in contact with Marcus Thorne? Isabella scrolled further, her heart hammering against her ribs. There were financial records. A large, untraceable payment had been made from another of Thorne's offshore accounts to Chloe just days before she announced her pregnancy to Alexander. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture so sinister, So diabolical that Isabella felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't a simple affair. Chloe hadn't been a mere opportunist who got lucky. She was a plant. A honey trap deployed by Marcus Thorne to infiltrate Alexander's life. The baby. Leo. He wasn't just the product of an illicit romance. He was a weapon. A Trojan horse designed to destroy the House of Sterling from within. Thorne's plan was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. He would have Chloe give birth to Alexander's son. Then, he would have her file a massive, public paternity suit. The ensuing scandal would paint Alexander as an adulterous, immoral monster. It would rock the Sterling Corporation stock, create turmoil among the board members, and make the company vulnerable. It was the perfect moment for a weakened, vengeful Marcus Thorne to initiate a hostile takeover, using the chaos as cover. He wasn't just aiming for revenge. He was aiming to seize the entire empire, using Alexander's own blood against him. Isabella leaned back, her mind reeling. She looked at the last attachment in the file. It was a grainy photograph taken with a long-lens camera 2 days ago. It was of Chloe Duvall pushing a stroller in Central Park. She was not alone. Sitting on the bench next to her, his face a mask of smug satisfaction, was Marcus Thorne. He was looking down at the baby in the stroller. And the expression on his face was not one of affection. It was the look of a man admiring his masterwork. His perfect tool of vengeance. A chilling realization washed over Isabella. Alexander's swift, brutal dismissal of Chloe and the baby. It wasn't a choice between his wife and his mistress. It was a calculated corporate maneuver. He wasn't choosing love. He was neutralizing a threat. But did he know? Did he know about Thorne's involvement? Or had he simply, by pure, cold-hearted instinct, cut out a potential problem before it could fester? The question hung in the air, heavy and menacing. Her husband was not just an adulterer. He was a man caught in a deadly game of corporate espionage. A game where his own child was a pawn. And he had brought that war into their home. Into her life. Placing her and their unborn daughter squarely in the crossfire without her even knowing it. The betrayal now had a new, more terrifying dimension. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was about a secret war he had been fighting. And she had been nothing but a piece on the board. Her anger returned. No longer brittle, but forged into something hard and sharp as steel. She closed the laptop. She now understood the game. And she would not be a pawn in it any longer. The silence in Alexander's home office was a weapon in itself. Isabella had chosen the battlefield with meticulous care. This room, with its dark mahogany walls lined with leather-bound books he'd never read, its scent of old money and ruthless ambition, was the very heart of his power. Tonight, she intended to stage a coup. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights of Manhattan sprawling below her like a diamond-encrusted web. She was not looking at the view. Her focus was inward. On the cold, hard knot of fury and clarity that had settled where her grief used to be. For 2 weeks, she had been a ghost in her own home. A study in quiet suffering. But Marco Diaz's encrypted file had been a transfusion of ice into her veins. The pain of the betrayed wife had been supplanted by the cold rage of a queen who discovers the entire war was fought in her name. But without her knowledge. When she heard his footsteps approaching, she didn't turn. The door opened and closed softly. Isabella. Alexander's voice was cautious, laced with the gentle, penitent tone he had adopted for weeks. He likely saw her standing here, ready to talk, as a sign of a thaw. A step towards the forgiveness he so desperately seemed to want. "I was just admiring the view," she said, her voice deceptively calm. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. "It's remarkable, isn't it? How from this high up, you can't see the dirt in the streets. You can't see the struggles, the little betrayals happening in every building. Everything looks clean, perfect, and under control." A flicker of unease crossed his face. This was not the broken woman he had been tending to. "Izzy, what's this about?" "It's about control, Alexander," she continued, taking a step towards his massive, imposing desk. She ran a hand over the cool, polished wood. "Your favorite thing. You control markets. You control companies. You control people. I'm just wondering, how does it feel when you lose it?" "I haven't lost control," he said, his tone hardening slightly, the mask of the remorseful husband beginning to slip. "No. Then you should have no problem explaining this." She didn't just show him the photograph. She began her assault with surgical precision. First, she placed a printed summary of Chloe Duvall's phone records on the desk. "These are calls made to a shell corporation. A rather clever one, I'll admit." Next, she laid down a bank statement summary. "And this is a payment of $250,000. Transferred to Chloe just before she got pregnant. The payment was routed through the Cayman Islands. But its origin is the same as the owner of that shell corporation." Alexander's face had become a thundercloud. He stood frozen, watching her as she built her case against him. Against the secret world he tried so hard to conceal. Finally, she placed the grainy photograph on top of the pile. Chloe Duvall. Marcus Thorne. The baby. And this. This is the man behind it all. Marcus Thorne. Your ghost of corporate battles past. Smiling at your firstborn son as if you were admiring a prize-winning racehorse. Or perhaps a weapon he had commissioned himself. The name Thorne was the final blow. Alexander stared at the evidence, his jaw tight enough to crack stone. The charade was over. There was no room left for lies. This wasn't an accusation born of jealousy. It was an indictment built on facts. "How?" he finally ground out, his voice a low growl of disbelief. "My security team is the best in the world. How did you get this?" "You seem to forget, Alexander, that I lived in the real world before you bought it for me. I still have my own resources," she said coolly. The lie was satisfying. Let him think she was more formidable than she was. But that isn't the question you should be asking. The question is, did you know? When you walked out that door, leaving me here, bleeding my heart out on the floor, did you know you were walking into a trap set by your greatest enemy? He sank into his heavy leather chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a profound weariness. He looked up at her. And the truth was there in his exhausted, steel-gray eyes. "Yes," he admitted. The word a confession of sins far greater than mere adultery. "I knew." Isabella felt a tremor of shock. Despite having suspected it, To hear him admit it was something else entirely. You knew. He leaned forward. Elbows on his desk. Burying his face in his hands for a moment before looking back up. His expression one of grim resolve. I've known for months. Not from the beginning. But long before the end. Chloe. She got careless. Too many questions about the board. Too much interest in the finer points of our Q3 earnings report. It was unnatural. It felt rehearsed. He explained how he'd tasked his security head with a discreet but total investigation. They'd bugged her apartment. Tracked her communications. They uncovered the link to Thorne about 3 months ago. They watched as Thorne coached her. Fed her information. And helped orchestrate the final act. His plan was brilliant. In its own sociopathic way. Alexander continued. His voice taking on the detached, analytical tone he used in boardrooms. The paternity suit was the public spectacle. But the real attack was financial. A morals clause with our Japanese Investorsa multi-billion-dollar funding lineage tied directly to my personal conduct. A scandal involving a secret child would have triggered it. The stock would have plummeted by 30, maybe 40% in a day. And Thorne, with his new backers, would have been waiting to launch a hostile takeover. Buying up a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. He wasn't just going to hurt me. Is he? He was going to decapitate the Sterling Corporation and wear its crown. He spoke of it with a chilling, almost academic detachment. Isabella listened. Horrified and mesmerized in equal measure. This was the real Alexander Sterling. The predator she had fallen in love with. The man who saw the world as a chessboard. So you played along. She breathed. The pieces connecting in her mind. You knew the baby was a weapon. And you let her give birth to it. I had to let the threat fully manifest before I could neutralize it completely. He said. If I had exposed her early, Thorne would have just denied it. Created a different kind of scandal. No. I had to let him think his plan was working perfectly. I had to let the child be born. And your grand performance at the hospital? She asked. Her voice dripping with sarcasm. The cold dismissal. The generous but airtight settlement. The non-disclosure agreement that could survive a nuclear blast. That wasn't a man choosing his wife. That was a king executing a traitor. It was the only move I had. He insisted. Standing now. His voice rising with passion. I had to legally and financially sever him from me in a way that was absolute. By creating a generous, legally binding trust and an NDA. I stripped Thorne of his weapon. Any attempt to sue me now would be a clear violation. Giving me grounds to countersue them into oblivion and take the child. I turned his Trojan horse into an empty wooden shell. The sheer, cold-blooded brilliance of it was staggering. He had faced down the greatest threat to his empire. A threat aimed at his very heart. And he had dismantled it with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. But his victory came at a terrible price. And me? Isabella's voice trembled. No longer with rage. But with a profound, soul-deep hurt. What was I in this grand strategy of yours? Alexander? Was I the queen you were protecting? Or was I just the castle? The territory you had to defend? You let me believe the most degrading lie imaginable. You let me think I was losing my husband to a cheap affair. You watched me break. Day after day. And you said nothing. You didn't protect me. You managed me. You kept your asset calm and in the dark because it was better for your strategy. I did it to keep you safe. He thundered, striding around the desk to stand before her. Thorn is a viper. If he knew that you knew, he could have come after you. After our daughter. Everything I did, the lies. The secrecy, all of it was to build a firewall around you. It was my only priority. That was not your decision to make. She cried out. It's my life. My child. I had a right to know what kind of war we were in. As her voice rose, a searing, white-hot pain shot through her. So intense it stole her breath. She gasped, doubling over, her hands flying to her heavily pregnant belly. Alexander's fury vanished in an instant, replaced by raw, undiluted panic. Isabella. What is it? What's wrong? Pain. She breathed, trying to straighten up as the contraction subsided, leaving her trembling. I think it's just stress. But another wave began to build. A powerful, deep clenching that radiated from her back. It was undeniable. Real. This was not stress. This was labor. Her eyes locked with his, wide with shock and fear. And then the final, unmistakable sign, the warm gush of her water breaking, soaking through her dress. A shockingly primal event in the cold, corporate sanctum of his office. Alexander. She whispered, her voice a mix of terror and awe. It's time. The baby. She's coming. In that moment, Alexander Sterling, the CEO, the strategist, the ruthless warrior, ceased to exist. He became just a man, terrified and completely out of his depth. The chessboard was wiped clean. The game was over. A new, far more important reality had just asserted itself. Okay, he said, his voice shaking as he guided her into a chair. Okay. We're okay. He was talking to himself as much as to her. He fumbled for his phone. His hands that could sign multi-billion-dollar deals now struggling to dial their doctor. The hours that followed were a surreal fusion of agony and intimacy. In the back of the Maybach, speeding towards Lenox Hill, Isabella gripped his hand. Her knuckles white. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of the contractions. All the lies and betrayals that had separated them just moments before were burned away by the sheer, overwhelming force of childbirth. There was no room for anything else. He was by her side constantly. A stark contrast to his clinical, detached visit for his other child's birth. He was her anchor. He breathed with her, his face a mask of concern, his eyes never leaving hers. He saw her pain, her strength, her fear, and it was reflected in his own expression. In the brightly lit delivery room, as Isabella gave her final, monumental push, a new life entered their fractured world. A daughter, perfect and screaming, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that, when they finally opened, were the same startling steel gray as her father's. The nurse laid the baby on Isabella's chest. The tiny, warm weight was grounding. A miracle amidst the wreckage. Serafina. Isabella wept. A sound of pure, unadulterated relief and love. Alexander leaned over them, his own tears falling freely onto the blanket. Heedless of his image, he reached out a trembling finger and stroked his daughter's cheek. He looked from Serafina to Isabella. His eyes raw with an emotion that was too profound for words, a mix of gratitude, awe, and a regret so deep it seemed to carve new lines into his face. "Forgive me, Izzy," he choked out. "Please." Looking at him then, stripped bare of all his power and arrogance, Isabella knew their old life was gone forever. Forgiveness was a distant country she wasn't sure she could ever reach. But as she held their daughter, their true heir, she understood that their future was not about going back. It was about building something new on the ruins of the old. A fortress. The aftermath was as silent and swift as a guillotine. Using the trove of evidence, Alexander didn't just defeat Marcus Thorne. He erased him. A series of anonymous data leaks to financial regulators and Thorne's own partners triggered investigations that dismantled his shadow empire. He vanished into a mire of litigation and ruin. A ghost for the second and final time. Chloe Duval and her son, Leo, quietly left the country. Beneficiaries of a war they never understood. Their silence bought and paid for. Life in the Park Avenue penthouse found a new rhythm. It was a quiet life. The trust that had been shattered was not magically restored. But it was slowly, painstakingly being rebuilt on a new foundation, one not of fairy tale love, but of brutal honesty and shared survival. Theirs was no longer a marriage of equals in love, but a partnership of sovereigns in power. One evening, years later, Isabella was reading a story to a 5-year-old Serafina in the nursery, now filled with the warmth and cheerful clutter of a well-loved child. Alexander came home and stood in the doorway, just watching them. The hard, ruthless edge he wore in the boardroom always seemed to melt away the moment he crossed the threshold of this room. He waited until the story was finished and Serafina was tucked in. Isabella joined him in the living room, where the scent of white tea and peony had long been replaced by the simple, comforting aroma of home. "She asked me today what a hostile takeover is," Isabella said, a small smile playing on her lips as she handed him a glass of wine. Alexander chuckled. A deep, genuine sound that was no longer a rarity. "And what did you tell our little corporate raider?" "I told her it's when someone tries to steal your favorite teddy bear," she replied. "And that's why we have to be smart and always protect what's ours." Together. He met her gaze. And in his eyes, she saw not the calculating strategist of the past, but the man he had become, a husband and a father who had learned the difference between the price of everything and the value of what truly mattered. He set his glass down, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "No more secrets, Izzy," he whispered against her hair. A promise he had made every day for 5 years. "No more wars fought alone. Just our war," she corrected softly. "Against the world." She finally looked up at him, her gaze clear and steady. She was no longer just his wife. She was his ally, his counsel, the co-ruler of their sterling dynasty. She had been tested by fire and had not burned. And together, they had built a future that was stronger than any lie. In the end, the war for the Sterling Empire was won not in a boardroom, but in the heart of a family that had been pushed to its absolute limit and chose to rebuild on a foundation of unyielding, unbreakable truth. Alexander and Isabella's journey shows that even the most shattered trust can be rebuilt when two people decide that their future together is worth fighting for. But the scars of betrayal often remain. What do you think? Was Alexander's choice a sign of ultimate love for his family? Or the coldest calculation of a corporate titan? Can a marriage built on such a devastating secret truly survive and become stronger? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of drama, betrayal, and high-stakes survival captivated you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a real-life drama. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories you won't find anywhere else. Thank you for listening.